Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and young students. Welcome to the United Nations. And tonight is a special occasion and a special place. I would like to welcome you to Battlestar Galactica. My special welcome goes to the representative from the 12 Battlestar colonies, representative of Caprica, representative from Ireland, representative from Aquarium, yes, and the rest of the 12 colonies. Welcome. Welcome. We are very happy to welcome you in what should prove to be a very lively and engaging discussion of issues that are dear to all of us. I am Kyo Akasaka, Undersecretary General for Communications and Public Information. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, recently established the Creative Community Outreach Initiative to forge meaningful and productive relationship with the international film and television industries to not only provide information about the United Nations, but also to find innovative ways to raise awareness on priority issues for all of us. The topic of tonight's program, Battlestar Galactica, has received overwhelming acclaim, as you know, not only for its gripping plots and caliber of actors, but also because of its issues that it addresses. These issues, such as children and armed conflicts, reconciliation, human rights, and terrorism, are central to the work of the United Nations, as it is the quest for solutions. To quote Isaac Asimov, famous science fiction author, science fiction writers foresee the inevitable. And although problems and catastrophes may be inevitable, solutions are not. I'm sure that we are all looking forward to tonight's discussion, and I would like to thank everyone involved in making this evening possible. And now please join me in giving a warm welcome to the President of the Sci Fi Channel, Mr. Dave Howe, who will say a few words of welcome.
Trust me, it's very scary being here. It feels very grown up. So I just want to talk a bit about the importance of Battlestar Galactica for us and how honored, incredibly honored we are being here tonight. And the unbelievably powerful thing about science fiction is that if you ask someone about the greatest science fiction stories of all time, they'll probably tell you that they're set in the future, or through some contrivance of time travel, they take place in the past. But the very best science fiction stories, the truly memorable ones, whether they're set in the future, in the past, or somewhere completely different, have always been about the present, about the human condition of today, viewed through the lens of tomorrow, so that we might see ourselves a little more clearly. I mean, that sounds very lofty, but actually that's true about Battlestar Galactica. Great science fiction forces us to look at who we are and ask the tough questions. Where are we going? Are we headed in the right direction? And what can we expect to find when we get there? And that's what Battlestar has done over the last 4 seasons. It's an incredibly exciting week for us as Battlestar comes to an end. And the final revelation on this Friday will bring the story to a close and answer some of those long-awaited questions that we all have. But we're incredibly excited and honored to be here tonight and to be invited by the UN's Department of Public Information to discuss the more important issues that this show has never shied away from. And we actually believe that the entertainment industry has a powerful voice to reach a wide audience. So we're excited to have our talent here to share some expertise from the UN and the panels that we've put together tonight. And we really do thank everyone for the spirit of collaboration and to be involved in tonight's program. We're also pleased to be joined by more than 100 New York City high school students. Where are you? There they all are. They're participating in tonight's conversation on behalf of a partnership between Sci-Fi's pro-social initiative, Visions for Tomorrow, and the educational non-profit organization ThinkQuest NYC. Visions for Tomorrow is... Do applaud that. It's a really amazing program. And Visions for Tomorrow is Sci-Fi's multi-platform campaign. And what we try to do is inspire individuals to play their role in promoting a positive tomorrow. So to get us started, here are some clips from Battlestar Galactica, which we hope will give you a little background as to why we're here tonight.
Moments ago, this ship received word of a Cylon attack against our home worlds is underway. As of this moment, we are at war.
The Cylons were created by man. They evolved and then destroyed their creators. The last survivors of the human race escaped in a fleet of ships led by the Battlestar Galactica, and their search for a new home began.
On the memory of those lying here before you, we shall find it, and Earth will become our new home. So say we all! So say we all!
In December 2003, this epic story came to television and made history. A series that took an unflinching look at the most hallowed truths and most terrifying fears of the human race.
I never wanted this kind of responsibility.
The Cylons never asked us what we wanted.
Challenging our concepts of justice, faith, and humanity.
Are you alive?
It's not enough to survive. One has to be worthy of surviving.
Over 4 award-winning seasons, Battlestar Galactica has continued to pose vital questions about the world in which we live.
My job is, and always will be, to keep the people safe.
The stories on screen mirror the reality of modern life. The stakes are high.
This is everything that we have been working for.
The journey uncharted.
We're going the wrong way!
The sacrifice unimaginable.
Other people are sent to die. For
As the final installment of this riveting saga plays out, we look back at the triumphs and struggles of this extraordinary group and see the issues of the world reflected.
where do we go from here?
Very powerful. Very powerful stuff. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator. We were beyond thrilled when she accepted our invitation to moderate tonight's event. She's an incredibly generous humanitarian. She's a UNICEF ambassador, Oscar-winning actress, co-host of The View, but the most important thing of all, she's a huge fan of Battlestar Galactica. Please welcome Whoopi Goldberg.
Thanks. Hey, I
have prepared remarks and then unprepared remarks. So I'll do the unprepared first. It is such an honor, number one, to be here at the UN, but to be here with a show that I believe is probably one of the best written shows on television, on a station that I love and adore and watch all the time, with actors that I also love and adore. It's a great honor to be here with y'all and with the writers and the producers and everybody else that's here, particularly the writer, because, you know, he's going to probably do another series at some point. Just kidding. Now here's the real remarks. Welcome to the United Nations Echo Shock Council Chamber. The United Nations is more than a building with fantastic curtains, but an idea that belongs to all the people of the world. With this in mind, it is important to get those universal themes that stand behind critical ideas like human rights and children's rights and peaceful resolution to armed conflict, national reconciliation, equality of opportunity, and justice to the widest possible audience. Now, Battlestar Galactica communicates these issues every week to an audience that might be largely unfamiliar with the mission of the UN, while nevertheless aspiring to common goals. Through a groundbreaking show on Sci Fi Channel in the US and over 30 countries around the world, BSG is both entertaining and audacious in challenging its viewers to question what is right, what is wrong, what are we all still trying to figure out in these very complicated times. Much like the fictional ships and planets in the BSG universe, the UN is an imperfect place. But the fight for justice, equality, fairness, and understanding remains fundamental to both. This struggle is essential for humanity and what makes us human. There are some of the themes that we hope to explore tonight. Tonight we'll show a couple of clips from the show that touch on some global issues that are important to everyone in this room. Then a representative from the UN will address the same issues from their perspective. I will pose a few questions of my own to the panel, and also keeping an eye out for your questions, because really it's about what you want to know too. So please raise your hand when you have a question, and wait for somebody to get there with a microphone, because we want to hear you. And we have a very limited amount of time tonight, so let's get started. Please, there's time for that later. Please welcome award-winning executive producers of Battlestar Galactica, David Icke and Ronald D. Moore. I'm supposed to do the rest of them. This woman is one of my great loves. She's the two-time Oscar nominee, actress who plays Laura Roslin, the president of the 12 colonies. Please welcome Mary McDonnell. He's the man that brought the steadfast Admiral Adama into the real world. Not like the old Adama. He's a new Adama that we've never seen before. Please welcome Emmy-winning and Oscar-nominated actor Edward James Olmos. And our first UN representative, expert Craig Mokhiber, Deputy Director of New York Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Conflict is the ultimate test of a value system. Torture and human rights violations fester in times of war and unrest. The surviving colonists grappled with these real-world dilemmas during their long exodus. And with the discovery of Cylon humanoid models within the fleet, anxieties reached a fever pitch.
I want this man interrogated first.
First of all, it's not a him, it's an it.
Do it.
Sir?
Tell me where the warhead is, otherwise you're gonna drown in that bucket.
I can't drown. I can't die.
Right. Commander Adama mentioned that, how if your body dies, your consciousness is downloaded or transferred into another body, something like that?
No, exactly like that.
Start again.
As the colonists struggled to find their way toward a promised land called Earth, they also moved toward a deeper understanding of their enemy. When the Battlestar Galactica reunited with Pegasus, a long-lost sister ship, the two crews clashed over the treatment of Cylon prisoners aboard.
Can you get it to roll over? Beg.
Thank you! Admiral, please.
You have already used the stick. It's time to use a carrot.
After a period of Cylon occupation on a bleak planet called New Caprica, a group of colonists calling themselves the Circle took it upon themselves to dole out punishment for acts of treason committed during wartime.
The Circle has examined the evidence and found you guilty of treason and crimes against humanity.
When these secret trials were discovered, President Laura Roslin didn't hesitate to act.
We all feel the need for justice, and we all feel the need for vengeance. And telling the difference between the two can be difficult at times. I am issuing a general pardon for every human being in this fleet. This will not be a popular move today, but I truly believe that this is the only way for us to move forward in strength, in a spirit of healing and reconciliation.
Over time, the colonists were forced to refine their ideals of justice and human rights. This was eloquently brought to light when Gaius Baltar was tried for treason. Lee Adama took the stand.
We are a gang, and we're on the run, and we have to fight to survive. This case is built on emotion, on anger, bitterness, vengeance, but most of all, it is built on shame. And we're trying to dump all that guilt and all that shame onto one man. And then flush him out the airlock and hope that that just gets rid of it all. So that we can live with ourselves. But that won't work. That's not justice. Not to me.
Humans and Cylons presented dilemmas for characters: waterboarding, torture, inhumane prisons, revenge, the words that resonate in these halls and on Galactica. Is it you?
Thank you very much indeed. Waterboarding and torture, Madam President. Shame on you. You have no idea how many times I wanted to say that in this room.
Be my guest.
Thank you very much indeed. I think, Whoopi, you set us off on exactly the right tone when you said that this is not just a building, it's an idea. And indeed, this organization was founded on a very basic idea. Unfortunately, an idea viewed by some these days as being its own science fiction. We have been accused in the United Nations of being a utopian organization. We look at it in a different way. It's true that we are an idealistic organization and that the vision here is of a world order that's based upon international law and international diplomacy as a means of settling disputes. To be sure, it is idealistic, but we don't see it as utopian. In fact, what we see it as is the only reasonable alternative to what would inevitably be I think, horrific dystopian society, the kind of thing that science fiction is so good at representing, the kind of world that we do see in Battlestar Galactica and other very good science fiction work. And the kind of societies, I think, where human dignity is not guaranteed as a matter of right, but where human dignity is granted by authoritarians or equally bad for sale on the market to the highest bidder. Well, this is good timing for this event because only a few months ago we celebrated the 60th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, one of the founding documents of this organization on the 10th of December in 1948. And when you think about what the world looked like, this world, Earth, looked like at the time that that declaration was adopted, it was not unlike the charred and scarred representations that we saw on Battlestar Galactica as a result of a horrific war that was accompanied by the most extreme forms of human cruelty on a massive scale. And that moment in history provided an opportunity to write a new contract in the way our societies should look, and this is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. At the time, it was thought to be a utopian idea. It was a very significant break from the way governments and societies were ordered in the past. Up until that moment, it was thought that every government, as a matter of the internal affairs of states, can do whatever the heck it wants to do to its people. But from that moment forward, here in the United Nations, the message went out that said, absolutely not. There are rules, and those rules apply to all people in all places and in all circumstances, regardless of threats, real or perceived. It was also a remarkable document because it laid out not just civil and political rights, but also economic, social, and cultural rights, all on par. Nelson Mandela said, we will not be forced to choose between bread and ballots. We will have both in the ordering of our societies. So that declaration, which, by the way, now is in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most translated document in the world, which we think is testament to just how universal a document it is. And we in the UN didn't do all those translations. It was the people in the 193 countries around the world that saw this as an important declaration and made the effort to translate it into their languages from Abkhaz to Zulu, as the UN website likes to say. And yet, 60 years after the adoption of that declaration, in these very halls, every single day, we're struggling with many of the same themes that we were struggling with at the end of the Second World War, and really interestingly, many of the same themes represented in Battlestar Galactica. I look at the show and I wonder whether or not you don't owe some royalties to Eleanor Roosevelt, since she wrote this in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights first, because there are so many similarities, not least of all the eternal struggle for the two freedoms, at least, freedom from fear and freedom from want, which after all is a centerpiece, it seems to me, of just about every show that Battlestar Galactica put forward. I think another thing that the two instruments, UDHR and BSG, have in common is certainly this idea of the slippery slope of moral ambiguity, moral relativism, and how easy it is in our societies to compromise on those things that we think are fundamental for ourselves when it comes to talking in particular about the other. We see it these days in the proliferation of Trumps. Things that our own governments want to tell us are more important than the rights that were guaranteed to us in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so suddenly we're presented with this false dichotomy of security versus human rights. And we're told that security is to be defined in terms of old-fashioned notions of state security, right? Rather than what the UN has been trying to sell for 60 years, which is that security is defined as human security, that freedom from fear, freedom from want of every individual, regardless of race, sex, language, religion, is the way that we define security, not what a government says is security. And that slippery slope, I think, shows up so much in the show, and it shows up so much in real life in the world in which we live. I mean, my idea of security, and I know Bob Orr, when he starts talking about the UN's approach to counterterrorism, will look at this as well, but my idea of security is that I want to be free from the fear that a terrorist will hijack an airplane, crash it into this building, and kill me. And I also want to be free from the fear that my government will drag me away in the middle of the night and lock me away because it doesn't like my race or language or religion or political opinion or my idea of its policies. That's security from the point of view of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The show also looks at the issue of economics and the issue of markets, and it helps us to ask the same question that the economic and social rights contained in the Universal Declaration ask, which is, do we really want to be living in societies where our rights are bargained like commodities, that health and education and housing that are so essential to a dignified life are something that can only be bought and sold and not a matter of right? Or where our labor doesn't have to be dignified, for example, or where private actors can have so much power that they can deny us our human rights. It's a question that the Universal Declaration asks. It's a question that the show asks as well. The last thing I think I would mention is this idea contained in both instruments of the many chauvinisms that pop up in all of our societies. This idea of the other, defining human beings as being the other so that we can dehumanize them and ultimately destroy them. This is a common theme of our reality, and it is a common theme, as we see, of our science fiction as well. And I think this will explore a little bit more in questions and answers, but this concept of the other, obviously very, very central. We also have something in common here, which is the idea of struggle. We are in a moment right now where not only do we have gross violations of human rights happening in countries around the world, and I would say in 193 countries in the world there are serious human rights problems, but we also have a moment right now where the very idea, as you called it, Whoopi, the very idea of human rights is under assault. The idea that so many other things now trump human rights. That human rights is a quaint old notion from the time of the founding of the United Nations, but these are hard new times, and we need new rules. We need to deal with people in ways that we might not like to, but suddenly we can't pay attention to the rules of human rights, and we absolutely reject that idea as a dangerous concept of moral relativism as well. A dangerous illusion. We are all Cylons. Every one of us is a Cylon, and every one of us is a colonial. And you have to get rid of the idea of good guys and bad guys, because the truth is, today I may be victimized, tomorrow I may be a victimizer. And the only solution to that is to operate on the basis of a common set of norms that are universally agreed, that apply to me and that apply to you, whether you like me or not, whether you agree with me or not. We're not moving in that direction. In the film clip, when I heard the actress scream, "We're going the wrong way," I wanted to join her in screaming, "We are going the wrong way." We need to get back to the essential mission of the Universal Declaration. I'll just close with this. Ron Moore, I read an interview with you where you described the BSG experiment as essentially an examination of what would happen if society was wiped out. What kind of society would we then want to replace it? What kind of a society we'd want to build? And human rights lawyers are used to this idea. It's a kind of a Rawlsian analysis. Rawls said that if we were blind and we had to do the ordering of society and we didn't know that we were going to be the rich or the poor or the powerful or the weak or the black or the white, what kind of rules would we put in place? And the answer, by the way, Rawls, John Rawls, the legal philosopher, not Lou Rawls, although Lou Rawls had it pretty right when he said we all need somebody to lean on, but that's a different discussion. This essential idea absolutely underpins BSG. It also underpins the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says very explicitly in Article 28, let me be a human rights lawyer, where it reads, "We are all entitled to a social and international order in which all of the rights and freedoms in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights can be fully realized, regardless of race, sex, language, religion, or I suppose your place in the Cylon colonial divide." So I would suggest that this is the mythical earth for which we are all searching, the mythical earth for which the characters in the series have been searching, and it is very much the vision of the United Nations as well. Only for us, it's not a myth. It's absolutely essential, and it is our reason for being here. I'll stop with that. I suppose there'll probably be some questions as well.
Well, so basically... What you're saying is that there are really rules that are so universal that they should apply to everyone, everywhere, at all times, terrorists, criminals, enemies, Cylons, everybody. All right. I just wanted to make sure I had it right. So, to the panel, I'll pose this. Using torture to get critical information, even if the quality of the information is impacted by the methods used, and even if your own values and those of your society become the first victims of these unspeakable acts, for example, the scene we saw with the waterboarding, and the obvious parallels to real-world events, you were writing this show before a lot of this was happening, or that the world at large knew it was happening. What were you thinking about?
Get the network off my back, David, whatever you do.
Well, some of that was coming out in the press. The first reports were starting to come out when we did the episode that was clipped there called Flesh and Bone in the first season. And we had gotten to a point in the show where we felt like we wanted to do an episode where they captured a Cylon, and that you had the classic scenario that's always bandied about where, you know, you've got the prisoner and he or she supposedly knows where the nuclear warhead is, and what would you do in order to get that information out. And our approach was essentially not to really sort of say, well, guess what, torture's bad. It was essentially to say it happens, it's going to happen in this scenario, and what does this do to the human beings that participate in it on both sides of that? What does it do to not just the person who's being tortured and trying to get that information from them, but also what does it do to the people who are in charge of it, the person that's in the room, the president who has to order it. And it was essentially an opportunity to simply have the audience think about these issues and these questions. I think that the show tried very hard over the course of its run not to sort of say, guess what, here's the answer to these problems. Here's how we're going to solve torture. Here's how we're going to solve this kind of ticking bomb scenario. It was essentially to say, think about this scenario. Put yourself in this scenario from a different point of view. Here is that ticking bomb scenario. He is a Cylon. He is saying he's got a nuclear weapon somewhere in the fleet. We do like Kara Thrace. She's our hero. Now watch her go on this journey and feel what happens in that room back and forth. And it was essentially just trying to sort of take something that was starting to become talked about in the press and sort of bring it into the drama, but not make it sort of a neat, you know, moral dilemma.
No, because in a traditional television show, the audience would have known that Leoben, the terrorist, had the thing that she needed. And so inherently you would have been connected to your heroine, because you would have known that despite the fact that she was doing these terrible things, it was for the greater good because she was getting information that was necessary to save people. We never said he had it. We never said it was absolute. And so instead what you had to do was ask yourself the question that I think we tried to pose throughout the course of the series, which is to the audience, are you rooting for the right side?
And to address what you said, Craig, shame on you, Madam President, it's a very right thing to state, because what the experience was inside the show, because of what David and Ron have said, there isn't a clear point of view here. This is people operating from fear. The experience for Kara Thrace and for the president was one of a great depression and shame, and having to have taken an action that they felt they had no other opportunity but that. But the experience of that is something we wanted to also expose to people, that people who are taking these actions that we find unacceptable are sometimes in positions where they don't see the solution. So how can we begin to, as a culture, develop the alternative thought in those moments and create a different response to that situation?
What about you, Admiral?
I can honestly just say one thing about this, which is unbelievable that we're all here doing this in this manner, and it makes so much sense. It's amazing. You're talking about a science fiction show, and you're talking about the humanity we live in today, which is something that I find incredible. And I still find it incredible, Craig, that we still use the word race as a cultural determinant. To this day, you should have never invited me here.
He always says that.
Because I detest what we've done to ourselves. Out of a need to make ourselves different from one another, we've made the word race a way of expressing culture. There's no such thing. On all you high school students, bless your hearts for being here. You're 100 champions right now that are going to go out understanding this. The adults in the room will never understand it. Even though they'll nod their heads and say, you're right, they'll never be able to stop using the word race as a cultural determinant. I just heard one of the most prolific statements done by one of the great humanitarians. He's really trying to organize and bring us together, and he used the word race as if there is a Latino race, an Asian race, an indigenous race, a Caucasian race, or Latino race. There's no such thing as a Latino race. There never has been. There never has been. There never will be. There's only one race, and that's what the show brought out. That is the human race, period. Now, the pressure comes, why did we start to use the word race as a cultural determinant? The truth is that over 600 years ago, the Caucasian race decided to use it as a cultural determinant so it'd be easier for them to kill another culture. That was the total understanding. To kill one culture from another culture, you couldn't kill your own race, so you had to make them the other. And to this day, I spent 37 years of my adult life trying to get this word out. And now I end up well prepared as the Admiral of the Battlestar Galactica to say it to all of you. There is but one race, and that is it. So say we all. So say we all. So say we all.
So say we all. I love that you did it here at the UN. I just, because what better place to say it? But now let me ask you, because you brought up a really interesting thing. Seeking revenge is catharsis, after the fact of one's own, or still worse, an entire community's weakness or cowardice during a battle in the past. So the sowing of eternal hatreds, which is what you're really talking about, Eddie, of those families and the relations of those you slaughtered, and vengeance. I mean, these are huge themes that you all also hit upon, and just in my own opinion, it's one of the themes that no one ever talks about, because as soon as you say, to whatever culture it is, we might have brought this on ourselves in the way that we have acted, you get knocked over. It's yes. Really, you're not supposed to say that, but I'm saying it because I'm in the UN. Nobody's going to hit me here. So your thoughts on it? Because to me, that's a huge part of Battlestar.
It is a huge part of Battlestar, and I don't know if it's in one of the clips that we're going to see, but I do believe that it is later on, where Commander Adama and one of the eights have a discussion about the responsibility for action and whether or not deep in our hearts we actually felt at the point when things were as dark as they could possibly be, whether we actually felt that the human race should survive. That part of our consciousness and part of our conscience was saying, we're not doing it right. Perhaps this should end. And the other part of oneself that wants to go on and continue won over that part. But there is that question, and it's a good one that we should all ask, I think. If we're not going to do it right, then what are we doing? Is I think what you're saying, and the show does ask that. You ask that.
Are there questions up in the hinterland? There y'all go. Okay, so you have to wait for somebody to come with a microphone.
Okay, maybe while they're waiting for the microphone, I'll just kick in here. First to say, Edward, that you are preaching to the converted. I love to hear somebody who's passionate about human rights in these halls, so thank you very much. I agree with you wholeheartedly that race is a fiction that was created to divide, and it goes directly to the point that I was making about the concept of the other, and how these things have to be creatively produced in order to ensure the power imbalances that have haunted all of our all of our societies. The language I was giving you was a quote from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It also uses the language of sex. We tend not to say sex anymore unless we're talking about sex, but to use the term gender instead in this case. So I agree with you, race is not real. What is real is racism. It is the differences ascribed to us by the other in order to keep us down, to oppress us, and to deny us the rights that are contained. So the idea remains the same, but I'll be the first to sign your petition to update the language when we're talking about things like culture.
I can honestly tell you, Craig, when a bug doesn't like you, that's racism.
That's so deep. I'm going to take a question from the audience. Number 2, please.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Naima Hakim. I'm from Hendrick Hudson High School, and I wanted to ask you all at the panel about technology. I know one of the major themes in Battlestar is technology going wrong. In our world, technology is a huge part of our lives, more and more, especially for kids. You know, communication is instantaneous. You know, we all love technology. We're addicted to it. You know, personally, I don't go a day without checking my email or my cell phone, etc. And I think another theme is that with this technology comes a power. And I'm not sure that my generation is fully aware of this power. What do you at the panel think kids should keep in mind in this age of technology that we live in? And can our technological addiction lead to a nightmare like the Cylons?
That's a great question.
I think that the show posited a future or an alternate sort of reality where the technology had flown away from them and they had created these artificially intelligent beings that then rebelled against them, and then the entire myth of the show goes from that point. I think that today we are living in a moment when that is really going to come to pass in probably all of our lifetimes. I mean, it's been a staple of science fiction for many, many years, this idea of, you know, it really dates back to the Prometheus myth of, you know, Prometheus stealing fire from the gods. And in Battlestar, we always took that metaphor to say that, well, mankind stole the fire from the gods and created life. And that's kind of where we are now. I've seen recent reports that some leading scientists have said that within the next 5 years or so, there may be an actual AI, a real artificial intelligence. And I think we really have to think about these issues and realize that when that moment happens, when we cross that threshold, we're going to be faced with profound ethical dilemmas about what we do, and is it a person, and once it's a person, how do we treat it, and will we extend human rights to a life form based on silicon instead of, you know, organic beings like ourselves. And I think, you know, young people today are going to deal with it as a reality, whereas we've, as adults, have all dealt with it as science fiction and sort of fantasies of what if there were robots walking around and they were people. In the show, one of the key struggles and one of the key questions that the characters like Adama and Laura kept asking one another over and over again was, would they ever accept the Cylons as people? Would they ever accept them as a person? Because no matter what they said, they were still constructs. They were still artificial forms. They looked like us, they bled like us, they smelled like us, they made love like us, they did all kinds of things like us, but at their core, they were synthetic. And could you ever accept a synthetic being as a true being? And I think that's going to rush up on us, I think, before we've ever really thought through the implications of what we're really about to do.
Well, and it's already rushed up on us in terms of stem cell research. I mean, we continue to debate the possibility that that which may prolong our own lives is at the sacrifice of an actual life, or the sacrifice of some group of cells that might inform our science. And it's really a tricky issue. I mean, it's true that we went back to a lot of the greats like Arthur C. Clarke and Ray Bradbury to sort of advance these ideas, these timeless notions of technology run amok and what happens when humankind loses its ability to control its technology. And yes, we have to take certain precautions, and we have to be ethicists and mindful about what the other ramifications are. And yet at the same time, as we've seen over the last 8 years, we have stopped or certainly slowed down the advance of medicine and science because we're so concerned with those political or social or philosophical or ethical issues. And so it becomes a very complicated issue because it's not just about be careful what you wrought, but it's about what might you have in your hands that can help you today.
Really quick, if I could just tap on that, to answer the question directly as to what the youth should do to prepare themselves in the usage of the power and the technology. There's a very basic truth that must be remembered at all times when you're living your life. It goes all the way back from the very beginning of the existence of us as human beings. And that is, you are what you eat, you are what you think, and you are what you do. So if you spend your time on technology in a constructive, creative way, you will be constructive and creative. If you use it as a way of passing the time and get caught up inside of the game world, then you're going to be in a game world. And you are going to be that. And there's no way of getting around it. It's a basic fundamentals truth that will last the test of time. You are what you eat, you are what you think, and you are what you do. So empower yourself. Think about it.
I'm going to take another question. And just even more basic, put the thing down occasionally. Make a phone call or sit down and write a letter. One of the reasons that Cylons come into being is because people get lazy. And the more time you take to do what you need to do, the less time you'll need for a Cylon to do it. That's just my opinion, though. Number 3, please.
Hi, I'm Tom Wineland from Regis. I was just wondering, based on the show, Mr. Olmos, tell me if I'm using this wrong, but it seems pretty clearly split between the Cylon race and the human race. However, over the course of the show, many of the Cylons, particularly Lieutenant Valeri during the course of her pregnancy, are shown to be more sympathetic and more human than many of the human characters. So within the context of the show, what does it mean to be human, and why do the toasters deserve to be treated as more than their namesakes?
I think you should
watch that toaster fight.
I'm going to toss that one over to Ron, because Ron really is the creator of this, and that really is a creation aspect. You know, what is human and what isn't human.
I don't think we ever attempted to really give that an answer. I mean, that was one of the fundamental questions that the show raised. What is it to be human? What does it mean to be human? How would you know it? And given, you know, these artificial life forms that have been created that look so much like us, at what point would you start to believe that they were human? Or at least believe that they had souls, or believe that they were worthy of personhood and rights and so on. And one of the tough things about the show was to constantly blur those distinctions, that really good people would do really horrible things and really horrible people would really do good things. And it was about sort of establishing in the audience's mind that innate contradiction of the human condition, that we all carry seeds of good and evil with us, and we tend to act on them in unexpected moments and in unexpected ways. And so we worked very hard to get to a place where we never really wanted the audience to be comfortable with the idea that the Cylons were truly good, or they could all be redeemed, or some could be redeemed. And likewise with humanity, we wanted the audience to sort of live in that sort of discomfort of not knowing the answer to that question.
So we're going to wrap this section up because we're going to move on. As we move to the next topic, thank you so much for coming up, Craig. You have to go now. As we move on to the next topic, please welcome Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict. And don't be upset with me, you know, because I'm going to work it out. Ms. Radhika Kumarswamy.
I did it.
I did it. Now, children are the first and most vulnerable victims in wartime, and even in this post-conflict societies, the risks of trafficking and horrible abuse exist. BSG waded into these issues in a way that many programs would never, ever attempt to. Watch the tape.
In times of war, children are the silent and innocent victims, used as pawns in deadly situations beyond their understanding. In telling the story of the conflict between human and Cylon, the plight of children was never overlooked.
You're gonna be fine. I promise you.
When a ship within the fleet was found to be a hub of black market activity, Leodama confronted the horror of child trafficking.
What about those children outside? How are they helping the fleet?
Everyone has needs. Some settle for cigars and liquor. Others are more demanding. It's hard to find the moral high ground when we're all standing in the mud.
While on official business, Laura Roslin meets a young girl and hears her story.
Hi, Cammy. I'm Laura. Are you alone?
When a girl's ship must be sacrificed for the safety of the fleet,
We'll be saving tens of thousands. I'm sorry to make it a numbers game, but we're talking about the survival of our race here.
Order the fleet to jump to Ragnar immediately.
the colonists face a harsh reality of life during wartime.
I've got terrorist contacts. Inbound target, heading this way. Oh my God, they're silent! I hope you people run hell for this!
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Ms. Goldberg. I first remember seeing your films so many years ago in Sri Lanka with my female friends. That was the global reach of your fame. So let me also say that I'm not a TV fan, and I rarely watch TV, but when I heard I was going to be on this panel, I made it a point to look at some of these programs. And what I found about this series is that it's a very deeply moral series. It was really nice to see not just special effects. And I really liked the fact that the morality was not the easy morality of black and white, but really of having to make those hard choices. And many of us who work in the field of armed conflict, these are choices that many of my field officers of the United Nations have to make on a daily basis, like this choice you had to make between that girl and saving the human race. So I must say there's really a lot to be learned. Now, with regard to children, as you know, the international humanitarian law sees basically 6 grave violations against children during wartime. One is, of course, killing children and maiming them. The second, of course, is sexual violence and trafficking. And in this case, perhaps I could just tell the story of Eba, a girl who was 13 that I met in the Democratic Congo. She was going to school and she was waylaid by a group of armed men, taken to the camp, repeatedly raped, kept in a state of forced nudity. And then when she ran away, someone found her and took her to this hospital, an amazing hospital in Congo called the Panzi Hospital, where there are 2,000 victims of sexual violence there at the moment. And at the age of 13, she was found she was pregnant. And the child was given birth to, and she was taken care of and allowed to go to school. But she was not looking forward to going back to her parents because she felt that they wouldn't understand what had happened to her. So that's one case. Then, besides sexual violence, there's the case of recruiting and using child soldiers. And then you hear the story of Moy, the boy I met in northern Uganda who had been abducted with his friend by the LRA. And then on the way to the camp, the friend couldn't make it. He slipped and fell. And he was watched as he was killed by the commanders. and then he was made to be in this group, attack his own villagers and his own family, and he continued to engage in this kind of activity till one day he just ran away. And when he met me, he said, "Madam, all I know is how to fight. What shall I do?" Then, of course, the other grave violation is attacks on schools and hospitals. As you know, in some parts of the world, such as Afghanistan and Thailand, there's attacks on schools, especially girls' schools, to prevent girls from going to school. And this is a terrible reality, even throwing acid at them so that they would not be able to go to school. And then there's denial of humanitarian access, the sixth grave violation, which is that especially for children who are displaced or refugees, denying them the right to food, water, sanitation, even basic education. These are considered war crimes and crimes against humanity. And now we are facing a changing nature of war thanks to what I think Bob will speak about, this new terrorism versus terrorism. We're having situations of suicide bombers who are children now. We have cases where aerial bombardment is leading to collateral damage, where a lot of children are being killed. We have children in detention. So all forms of new kinds of violations also emerging. Now, 10 years ago, Graça Machel, Nelson Mandela's wife, headed a team to look at the situation of children in armed conflict. And as a result of her report and the moral weight of her report, the United Nations decided to create at the highest level, the Undersecretary General level, an office and a special representative on children in armed conflict. Also, in the last 10 years, we've seen the International Criminal Court indicting people for recruiting and using children for sexual violence against children. These are positive steps. And also the Security Council, the most reticent of all bodies, has actually moved forward on this issue and adopted Security Council Resolution 1612, which has sanctions, possibility of sanctions against those who recruit and use children. So at least for the last 10 years, something has happened. And as I tell people, I hope with the momentum we have gained in the last 10 years, at least with regard to child soldiers, that perhaps within 25 years, like slavery, we will be able to abolish it. But let me end perhaps to say the story of the resilience of these children you meet when you go to the field. And I know the UN field staff are not here to tell the story. They're real heroes, rarely portrayed. The UN in the field, in the front lines, saving child soldiers, working with victims, UNICEF, UNHCR. They can tell perhaps this girl they introduced to me called Aisha. Her house had been, in Afghanistan, her house had been bombed and she lost a little bit few of her relatives. Her school had been attacked, but she was determined. She was going to go to school. She was going to become a school teacher, no matter what anyone did or said. And that kind of resilience that gives us hope, even now. So, thank you.
Are you seeing more young women being violated than you've seen ever before? Has this always been the case and we're just catching up to young women's part in the way they're being treated?
I think women have always been victims in warfare. Sexual violence has often been a weapon of war. It's a way of terrorizing the other population. That's always been true. But I think what is new or unique are things like women now, both as sex slaves and combatants. We're having this phenomenon now of women, girl children, as fighters, as well as being sex slaves. And we're also having the issue of girls being trafficked a lot for exploitation and abuse, for sex work or for domestic aid. From the conflict areas, they're so vulnerable, they're easily exploited.
One of the things that this show doesn't seem to have are gender barriers, because the men and the women are doing the same work, they're showering in the same showers, using the same bathrooms. We see a woman president before anyone really thought it was going to happen. Again, you seem to have some visualization of the future. What are you eating?
Cheerios.
Okay.
I mean, the gender neutrality of the show was one of the earliest discussions that David and I actually had on the series, because one of the very first ideas when I was approached to sort of do a new Battlestar Galactica, one of the very first notions I had was, well, what if we made Starbuck a woman? Because Starbuck had been a man in the original series. And from that premise, we started then saying, okay, well, if that's the case, she shouldn't be the first fighter pilot. She should just be one of many fighter pilots. And so that the character was not a comment on, oh, look, a woman can finally do this job. It was just that in this world, women do these jobs all the time. And then it became, all right, well, who's the president of the civilian government to balance Adama's military power? And it seemed logical, you know, in a dramatic sense, to have a father figure and a mother figure. I was also intrigued by the idea of sort of subverting the idea that she would be the dove and he would be the hawk. And so there were things to play, but then it became also something that we said, let's not make her the first woman president, or that there anything unusual about that. And then, oh, let's do co-ed bathrooms. And it just sort of all flowed outward to the point where we just said, well, there's really no gender stereotypes in this world. There's still men and there's still women, and they still have certain things biologically that seem like they're eternal, but that we wanted to sort of present a sci-fi world in which people simply didn't think about that, and there weren't stereotypes and there weren't prejudices, and it was an interesting sort of case to say, well, what if we really played that straight? And we didn't have, you know, gender-based epithets. We sort of decided that the word that rhymes with witch wouldn't really be used as a curse word in the among the people.
Women would be called sir.
Women would be called sir. We just started to say everything was going to be gender neutral.
Although interestingly, we maintained a certain ethnic tension.
Yeah,
we didn't rid the culture of any ethnic tension. We maintained the idea that there still existed problems and.
There were cultural differences between the colonies, and they
the wars had emerged between different colonies that were based on, to a certain degree, on culture and ethnicity, but that sex or gender was not a part of that.
And as president, Laura Roslin, what? I mean, I know that part of it is in the writing, but it is also in the acting. So, what were you drawing on? Since there is clearly no
template.
There's no template here for this.
Well, there wasn't a template. Well, certainly in the U.S. of A., many incredible female world leaders to draw upon. But what was fascinating about what they also created was to create a female president who had not had the ambition towards that position, and on an ambition and an experience level, perhaps was ill-prepared. Therefore, the job became finding within Laura Roslin inner resources of power that had been heretofore undiscovered. So it became kind of an interesting exploration of women and their personal relationship to power, which can sometimes have a push-pull internally. So that was basically my experience, was drawing on that push-pull, and from there taking actions that quite often fell into the area of sort of a more masculine, classically masculine energy, which was a survival, clear action. And there were times when this president's femininity had to be put to the side, might we say. So when I hear these stories about girls, and I see high school girls here, and you're asking questions about technology, and we're hearing these horrific things that are still happening to women, and we're also talking about a female president. My hope for all of it is that we begin to, as Eddie said with race, understand the human rights of the female, and understand that those rights are as legitimate and powerful and necessary for the survival of the planet as some of the other issues that we face. And a lot of those feelings and ideas would come up playing her as personal, internal thoughts.
Right.
But in the world of Battlestar, it was not really ever a problem, except occasionally a few quips about the school teacher. It was never really an issue.
So, Radhika, what is the UN actively doing now to make sure that we can keep a better eye on child warriors and all of the things that are happening with young women around the world? And what can they do? All those nice young people sitting there, what can they do? Because I know part of the reason y'all are here is for some solutions that you can work on. So listen up.
I think if you have to divide two parts to the UN's response. The first is to punish and deter perpetrators. I think that's really important. First is a sense of justice, but also as deterrence. So what we have started over the time is now with the International Criminal Court to begin to punish people. Now there's a first case before the court was a case of Thomas Lubanga, who was recruiting and using children. Another case of sexual violence. These are international courts that are actually trying cases. There are a lot of technical rules that doesn't cover everybody, but at least it's a beginning. It sends a strong signal. And the Security Council Resolution 1612 also, you will be the victim of sanctions if you recruit and use children. So those things are slowly, I'm not saying they're final, but that being set in place. The second is at the programmatic level. What we have is UNICEF on the ground. We have UNIFEM, and we have UNHCR. These groups, they run programs for these children, for the victims of sexual violence. In DRC, they're supporting this hospital. They run programs for reintegrating child soldiers back to their families. That's not so easy. You can't just take a child who's been killing and just hand him over to the mother. The mother can't handle him sometimes. So you have to work with the family, with the mother and the child. So these are all programmatic things that we're doing in the area. So for these children, of course, one is to maybe adopt children in this work that are in the field, that are working with UNICEF, to support the work of UNICEF and others in the field would be very useful through programs and ideas and taking part in their activities.
I need to ask you this question because it just popped into my head. Is it difficult when you're dealing with all these delegates, many of who come from countries where women are third after the horse, is it difficult to convince them, just as delegates, to change their thinking?
You know, it's very interesting, but at the normative level, everybody ascribes to it. Now, the two most signed conventions in the world are the Convention on the Rights of the Child and Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, especially the Convention on the Rights of the Child. They think of their daughters, they think of their sons, but they make reservations when it comes to personal life, in the distribution of property, in the distribution of child custody, those kinds of issues, there's a lot of discrimination. But on the violence issue, generally, people, at least at the United Nations, come on board and you can get a consensus.
I'm glad to hear that. Now, number one.
Hello. Thank you so much, everybody here, for coming. It's amazing I didn't have to pay admission and go to a Comic-Con convention. I simply had to I simply had to stand in a line and I'm here. A very short line, by the way. My question is going to pit the president versus the commander for maybe their final time. I don't know. This is for Mary and for Edward James. And this goes along the point of our kind children's ambassador we have, first speaker. The question itself is, does the military get to dictate to the people, or does democracy prevail? Now, this is a question about capital punishment, which is a recurring theme in the show. And I have another two parts to this. The airlock was, I think, like walking the plank. Now, was the airlock a crime/violence deterrent? Did it work? Does it ever work? And can you ever truly right a wrong? Thank you, and I would like to hear from Madam President and from the Commander Adama.
I think it is a crime. I think the airlock is an action that is a crime. It's a violation of life. I think that my experience inside the show and having the great opportunity to explore the condition of war and what it does to a human being and what it does to the population surrounding the positions of leadership made me realize that we are continually committing crimes in order to convince ourselves that we're right. And it is the commitment to being right that has to be given up, because to me it's the root of the war crime behavior. And the experience of having to send people out an airlock, once again, was a haunting experience. And I would imagine that there are many people who commit these crimes who have a haunted experience from that point on. And wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if we could find a way, a different way, to approach the enemy and resolve the situations? So on a certain level, I do think it's a crime. I was absolutely committed to it as Laura Roslin in the moment, because as the actor, you work inside a certain set of confines, and you have a container, and that's where you make your choices. So I felt that she was doing what needed to be done. But yes.
Well, Mary can talk about how she was haunted by the idea of an airlock, but she was also the one who made it a verb.
Yes, indeed. The good thing about being an actor is that you can really enjoy committing crimes. And as opposed to punishing you, they give you gifts. So we lead a very odd existence.
We have to remember that what we were talking about in this program was the annihilation of the human species, where 50,000 plus human beings were escaped in a ragtag fleet, and not knowing what was left of the annihilated planets from which we came from. Under that understanding, the military had to do all military decisions at any given time. And since the president was the 214th person in line to get the presidency.
No, excuse me. Wasn't I the 43rd?
Oh, excuse me.
43rd.
43rd.
No gender bias there.
That's all right.
I'm
I
so
often
sorry.
correct him.
43rd person in line to get this job. If 42 people ahead of her were annihilated, she would get the job, and she got it. And I was in the middle trying desperately hard, under a military understanding. We needed and had to become very, very militant and very, very terroristic. We needed, like Vice President Cheney said 2 days ago, I think on Meet the Nation, he proclaimed that President Obama was handling our national security in a very weak way by doing the things he was doing, and that we are at a war. Right away, you understand exactly where he's coming from. And everybody usually says, the man's right. Many of us now are saying, because of this show and because of people experiencing different, really monumental moments of understanding of what's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan and along the border of Mexico, which I still don't understand why the UN has not put the blue helmeted armed forces in that region, with over 5,000 women dead since 1993. Children have been killed and raped and pillaged in that one city. And Mexico has the audacity to say that they can't control it. And yet when the military started losing their captains and their sergeants and their military, and the police started to lose to the narco traffickers, they ended up immediately dispersing 5,000 military soldiers to the region to fight these guys. And yet, I don't, militarily, your question is, and has answered. I took care of every single military question. I don't care what the president said. I did not listen to the president when it came to military decisions, and that is a mistake. That's not correct. And yet that was exactly what had to be done at that moment, because we were caught in a very difficult situation of inexperience, total annihilation, and a retired old man. And so it was, go ahead.
Sorry. One of the things that we wanted to sort of explore in the show, which goes to your question, was the idea of how fragile the law really is under stress and under certain circumstances. You know, there was a Roman orator named Cicero who once said that in times of war, the law falls silent. And there was a president of the United States who once said that if the president does it, it can't be illegal. And these are things that we have to live with and understand, that as much as we hold up the law and as much as we say that these laws are firm and solid and we will, we bake our civilizations on them, and that we are, no man is above the law, we have to remember that in times of crisis, it does come down to human beings who decide to discard them, and that those situations do happen all around us, and we have to sort of understand how that happens and then hopefully find ways to prevent it from happening, because it's not as big a step as you might think before somebody gets chucked out an airlock.
It's really
or airlock, as Laura would say. You get a brief glimpse into the dynamics of the set when you hear Mary talk about her character as Laura, and you hear Eddie talk about his character as I.
Let me just tell you how far this went. This is really an extraordinary, extraordinary understanding, which we're about to place on the table, and a lot of you know that it happened. We had a very difficult situation aboard the ship, where a 19-year-old youthful child was having a baby, and she didn't want to have the baby. And on Caprica, which our president was from, the law was right to choose. And I went crazy as the actor and said to her on camera, "Are you nuts? This is not going to happen. We need every single life." And at that moment, off camera, Mary was livid because it was such a difficult thing for her to take, an understanding, and be thrown into this really incredible. She knew, and she got caught in the conflict because she believes in the right to choose in her own life, as do I. But at that precise moment, we brought the show to a head-on collision with one of the most difficult situations, and at that moment, we all had to say, no more killings of any children at all, under any circumstance. Every single life that we have, we need, and we have to move forward. There is no more right to choose. And it floored the world. Nobody was ready for that.
I was.
Oh, I know you were.
Because there were only 300-400 of you.
Yeah.
So everybody, I was like, hey, got to deal with it. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to move us a little bit faster, because we're having such a good time that we're kind of getting a little languid. So I want to move. I want to say thank you to you, and I would like to invite the Assistant Secretary General for Policy and Planning, Executive Office of the Secretary General on Terrorism, Mr. Robert Orr. So it's impossible to relate to the irrationality of suicide terrorism. However, the clips and the whole storyline on New Caprica really help to show that often terrorism is far from irrational. It's the response of the oppressed, the weak, the powerless against such a strong power, against a much stronger oppressor. It's the leveling of a lopsided playing field, and BSG did not flinch in dealing with such tough issues. Please take a look.
In our modern world, the threat of terrorism is an international crisis and reality. When the rules of war fall by the wayside, the results are catastrophic. During their time on New Caprica, the colonists were under the thumb of their oppressors like never before.
134th day of the Cylon occupation of New Caprica. Today is Mars Day. Somehow it seems appropriate to honor the god of war on a day when it feels like perpetual war is the only realistic prospect for us. Our insurgency has been striking back against the Cylons whenever and wherever possible. Although at times these attacks seem like futile gestures, I believe that they are critical to morale, to maintaining some measure of hope.
You were gonna hit the marketplace. The market. Full of civilians. This is crazy. You know, we need to figure out whose side we're on. Suit up.
The desperate situation on New Caprica threatened to divide the surviving colonists. Even seasoned military veterans resorted to guerrilla tactics.
I don't care that it's effective. I don't care that the Cylons can't stop it. It's wrong. No more suicide bombings, Colonel. You understand?
What, are you working for the Cylons now?
We are talking about people blowing themselves up.
You know, sometimes I think that you've got ice water in those veins, and other times I think you're just a naive little school teacher. I've sent men on suicide missions in 2 wars now, and let me tell you something. It don't make a goddamn bit of difference whether they're riding in a Viper or walking out onto a parade ground. In the end, they're just as dead. So take your piety and your moralizing and your high-minded principles and stick them someplace safe until you're off this rock and you're sitting in your nice cushy chair on Colonial 1 again. I've got a war to fight.
Yes, sir.
No one likes to talk about terrorism. Even less do people like to talk about nuclear Armageddon. Preparing for this, I had to stop and think about when the last time in any social situation I talked about either one. I work in a funny place. We actually talk about terrorism, nuclear Armageddon, human rights every day. But I literally came up with the day that I last talked about nuclear Armageddon optionally. 1982. And I work here. We don't like to confront these tough issues in our world, but they are oh so real. If a show like Battlestar Galactica can get us thinking about it, get us talking about it, amen. It isn't easy. I mean, even just watching these clips, I've heard these words from people, but they weren't actors. They're real people talking about their struggles and how they were going to fight them. And you soft heads at the UN, just please get out of our way, because we got some things to settle. If we can get ourselves talking about this, we might be able to figure out some solutions. Perhaps the biggest existential threat to all human beings on this planet today are the intersection between nuclear weapons possibly falling into the hands of terrorists. That's not yesterday's problem. Unfortunately, it's today's problem, and even more unfortunately, it's probably tomorrow's problem too. Talking about it, though, isn't enough. We need to get to some solutions. And that's where this building comes in, and the people in it every day. 3 years ago, we sat down and said, we need an agreement of all 192 countries on terrorism. I got some really good reactions on that one. Yeah, have fun. Assistant Secretary General Laura, good luck. We'll see you in a few months when you've wizened up a little bit. The amazing thing is, after a long and hard negotiation, every country on this planet agreed to a real, serious, global counterterrorism strategy. That was 2 years ago. And if you read this strategy, every government, member government of this organization, every government around the world, said that terrorism is unacceptable in all its forms and manifestations, committed by whomever and for whatever purpose. Unacceptable. But even more than that, this strategy laid out policies that, again, every government agreed to on how we're going to fight terrorism. And we're not just going to fight it through police actions and military actions. We are going to fight it by trying to address conditions conducive to terrorism. We're going to bring the parts of the UN together that work on human rights, that work on education, that work on development, all the, quote, soft stuff that is really not so soft. We're going to look at the conditions that get people to turn towards terrorism. And an amazing thing happened when that strategy was agreed. Governments started to realize they might just be able to do this stuff. And we've seen over the last 2 years, governments around the world start to do things differently, start to work with people, start to work with civil society in their countries to address these threats. This is a pretty amazing thing. And it reminded me, this is a pretty amazing organization. There's no other place on this planet where you can bring all those governments together to try to sort it out. Craig said a lot about human rights, but I want to echo it because I'm the terrorism guy. I'm here to talk about terrorism. And I will tell you straight up that human rights and counterterrorism are not and cannot be seen as antithetical to each other. They are not contradictory. In fact, if you are to have a successful counterterrorism strategy in this world today, it has to be built on human rights and respect for human rights. So the clips we saw on terrorism, the clips we see on human rights, it's one. It's one show. It's one reality for us. I just wanted to say a word about the Colonel here and his passion in extreme circumstances. You know, I want the extreme circumstances exception. Under extreme circumstances, come on, let's just marginalize this talk, nice talk about human rights. It's exactly at those times when it's most extreme that those human rights and that rule of law is most important. And we see that in this show, and I think a lot of people are thinking about it because of the show. We see it every day at this organization. So I would like to thank the creators, the actors who give it such force. You've gotten a lot of people to think about issues that we try to get people to think about every day. And so my hat's off to you. Thanks.
I want to ask this question because Salty, you know, that's my man. One eye, the whole thing. Who wrote that speech?
Ron did. In fact, he came into my office. I was waiting for the first script for season 3? 2. I said, how's it going? He said, okay. I said, you seem, you know, a little measured. He said, well, I gouged out Ty's eye. And I said, okay, it's going to be great. I don't know, but what possessed, were you bored, or what was it that possessed you?
I was writing the script for the sort of arc on New Caprica, and we had talked about that somebody should come away from this experience with a scar, an emotional scar, and then we had various sort of dramatic things for how people were going to be emotionally scarred, and that didn't feel like it was enough, and it felt like losing an eye was a visible scar that, you know, a character could carry with him.
Yes, it was.
Yes, it was. And that would, you know, stand in for a lot of people who suffered and who bore a lot of different wounds and scars from this experience. That speech, it was important to somehow really confront what they were doing in the show. That, you know, it was going to be, they were going to use this tactic, that these people in this extraordinary circumstance were going to use anything that they had. And Colonel Ty would be the one that no matter what, he was going to fight. He was going to fight with a rock. He was going to fight with a stick. He was going to put a bomb on a kid and send him into a parade ground and blow people up. He was not going to quit. And somebody had to call him on it, and somebody had to confront him about that. And that he had a rationale. He wasn't crazy, and that in some ways was more frightening and more disturbing, is that he wasn't crazy. And it was a very rational and it was a very thought out method that he had chosen to use, and he would back it up, and even when he was called on it, he was going to keep doing it. And I just felt like it was important to put that idea out there to make people think about it, and make people think that, the people that do these things are human beings, and they get to this place not because, their brains have fried and that they've taken drugs or something, although I'm sure that's happened. But a lot of them get there because they think about it and they've made a decision to do it, and that's a much more difficult thing to confront, I think.
Well, it also, sort of shows you what people are capable of when all their hope is gone, when everything goes. All of the rational things that you know that you should be doing go out the window, and then it becomes something else. So one of the things I think that the show also does is it puts a human face to not just rage, but desperation, And when we're watching you talk about the time that you guys have been on New Caprica and hearing just not the hopelessness, but the tone of disappointment of not finding what you hoped for and feeling that was it. Knowing that, of course, Saddam is out there somewhere, but we don't know if he's dead.
Yeah.
We don't know if he left. We don't know what happened to him. So if you haven't seen this part, just know that something good's coming.
Well, if I may, the interesting thing acting in that territory was that the insurgency and the feeling of togetherness and the feeling of this is the only action we can take, and it is an action, and our survival could depend on it, was very powerful and palpable. When I had to turn around as the character and confront Saul Tighe on the suicide bombing issue, I was surprised at how difficult that was for the president, who had just been so deeply committed to the insurgency, to suddenly pull out a higher idea and confront a co-insurgent with it was a really complex switching of experiences that one would expect. And I really admired it as a confusion.
So you're working on really making it better. So what you're saying is that we are making inroads here at the UN to balancing this issue out. Is that basically what you're telling us?
We have a very long way to go, but we are making very real inroads. Let me give you just one taste of this. As part of this discussion, governments are very uncomfortable talking about national security issues, what they consider the most kind of close-held rights and authorities of governments, to talk with 191 other governments. But then you start talking about letting real people in the doors, people off the streets, NGOs, people with ideas on this, media. It gets very scary very fast. Well, what has happened that's very interesting is we said if we are to address this problem, we have to break out of the cones that we're talking about this issue in. Let's open up the conversation. We need a global campaign against terrorism. It has to be and feel unacceptable to everybody. Not just some people, but everybody. How do you do that? We started with victims. After every terrorist bombing, every terrorist act, and they happen just about every week of the year, somewhere on this planet, there are victims. And for a few days, there are cameras, people look at them, people listen to them, and then they're gone. Except they're not. They and their families suffer for years and years to come. In most places, they don't get much of anything in the way of services. They don't get support. They not only get forgotten, but they, in some ways, get kind of blamed for what they were victims of. Hey, don't make noise about this. I know that happened a long time ago. Can't you move on? Societies want to forget about it. by bringing victims into this actual chamber last September, first meeting ever in the history of this world, where we brought victims from all over the world into this chamber, sitting where all these colonists are sitting down here. And these victims told their stories. Every religion, every culture, every part of this planet. And I watched ambassadors take their talking points and throw them out. We started the conversation all over again, because these are real people who have real needs that we need to meet. And when they talked about terrorism, it was personal, but it was so clear what we had to do. And so it's helped to mobilize now victims from around the world are starting to talk to each other, talking to us, talking to their governments. So we're starting to make some inroads on this global movement against terrorism. Let's not just treat this as a policing action. Let's actually change hearts and minds and get on with the business of living and loving and all the things we should be doing.
Right on.
Well, I will take one question, and you're going to have to decide which one. Pick a number.
Oh, number 1, right here.
No, yes, person there.
Hi, I'm Francis Jimenez, and I just want to thank you all for this opportunity and joining you here tonight. My question is as follows. In respect to the destruction of one quorum and specifically how it was handled on one episode, what commentary are you making to people living in times of crisis and hardships?
Say that one more time. Say it one more time.
In respect to the destruction of one quorum and specifically how it was handled on one episode, what commentary are you making to people living in times of crisis and hardships?
Thank you.
With respect to the destruction of the quorum. Okay.
He's referring to an episode in which there was an attempted coup aboard Galactica. There was a mutiny aboard ship, and during that process, Tom Zarek, who was the vice president, was trying to assume the roles of the presidency and sought support from the quorum, which was the elected body of representatives that formed the civilian government. And when they refused to give it to them, he had them all shot, and they were all killed within the quorum chamber itself. I don't know that we were trying to make a specific sort of moral statement or point with it. It seemed like it would follow from the events that had transpired aboard the ship. We were trying to simply throw light on these kinds of situations when there's moments of crisis. When governments fall, they tend to be very messy. And there are many situations in history and in contemporary times when, a government has suddenly fallen and then all the former heads of it mysteriously end up dead, very quickly. And it just felt like within the confines of the show, the reality that we were constructing, that would happen here as well. And it was another way of sort of saying, okay, this is a really interesting action-adventure story. We got lots of people running around corridors shooting at each other, and it's kind of fun and it's kind of escapist, but let's not lose sight of the fact of what really happens in these situations. What really happens in these situations is a lot of good people who try to stand up and do the right thing often get shot for their trouble. And that's probably the extent of what we were trying to say with that moment.
So, Robert, thank you.
Thank you.
So, our last topic, reconciliation and dialogue among civilizations and faiths. Please welcome Minister and Deputy Permanent Representative, Permanent Mission of Liberia to the United Nations, Famata Rose Asod. So religious intolerance and misunderstanding has played a huge role in so many fractured societies. These themes are also played out on Galactica. Cylons and humans were initially enemies, but in the end they had to find a common goal and work together to try to save themselves. Let us watch.
I've asked you here to find out why the Cylons hate us so much.
It's what you said at the ceremony. Before the attack, that humanity was a flawed creation. You said that humanity never asked itself why it deserved to survive. Maybe you don't.
Deeply rooted hatred and misunderstanding between cultures is often born out of religious differences, and the essential struggle between human and Cylon was no different.
Lords of Cobalt, hear my prayer. I don't know if he had a soul or not, but if he did, take care of it.
Historically, the colonists had worshipped multiple deities, while the Cylons believed in just one true god. An emerging sect of monotheists endured religious persecution.
Old gods die hard, even among your people.
This is unacceptable. We have been targeted because of what we believe by those who answer to faceless gods that bear no relevance in our world. They want us to be afraid. I am tired of being afraid. The time has come to make a stand. And that time is now.
This opposing ideology caused years of strife, and the idea that these enemies could join together was unthinkable. But a shared hope for a better future finally prevailed. Both sides found common purpose in their search for a new home.
So you're all in agreement this is the way to Earth?
It's a stretch, but it's the best explanation we've got.
Which is why we chose to share this information with you. We could have jumped away with it, left you behind. But that would have led to another confrontation, another standoff.
All this has happened before.
But it doesn't have to happen again. Not if we make up our minds to change. Take a different path, right here, right now.
All right. I'll release your crew. We go to Earth together.
There's another force at work here. Whether we want to call that God or the gods or some sublime inspiration, it exists. And our two destinies are entwined in its force. God's not on any one side.
Good evening, everyone. I'm quite pleased to be here this evening. On Friday, when I was told that I'll participate in this, I was thinking, I said, maybe I don't have the time. But anyhow, I did find the time because of the importance of what was going to be discussed. And so I just put my thoughts together. Regretfully, I didn't see your show, the tape before. Anyhow, I would like to express my appreciation to the DPI and Sci Fi Network for giving me the opportunity to make a few brief remarks on reconciliation and dialogue among civilizations and faiths. Today, we are witnessing a growing misunderstanding among faiths, religions, and cultures, which are threatening interfaith dialogue among civilization and faiths. We have seen that territorial dispute, ethnic and national divisions, and broken economic and social ties all provoke instability, uncertainty, and violence. The Charter imposes the imperative on all human beings to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors. Religious and spiritual leaders must lead a peace process only if they do not advocate their own doctrinal perspective. They must lead all people of faith to recognize the shared values and principles that come from our common heritage in God. and they must help us look beyond difficulties to things that unite Muslims and Christians and can bind them together. Experience has shown that before 2006, dialogue could be a euphemism for monologue. Reconciliation had often been used by the dominant forces to talk of their control of the national political process. Power was conceived in terms of coercive activities of those in charge of the governance of the society, which in many cases, this is still true. Reconciliation cannot take place when a segment of society is ignored or discriminated against. By drawing social and political attention to the significance of reconciliation and uniting people around cultural development and creating a meeting place for dialogue, we will then be striving for lasting peace. There has to be real and honest dialogue, and there must be transparency, and leaders must have the courage to speak the truth and have confidence in themselves and trust others. Most of you here must have witnessed the saga that took place in Liberia in the early 1990s. A compromise was reached in 2004, which ushered in the first Liberian and African woman president. Under her leadership, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established in 2006 and began functioning in 2008. During that period, victims recounted horrific accounts of war crimes committed by all sides, while perpetrators often failed to admit violations or ask forgiveness, and appeared to use the hearings to absolve perception of their guilt. However, gains were made in the reconciliation process. I hope that we can all be imbued with the spirit of true reconciliation if we were to be moved by this spirit. We can indeed make the world safe for diversity and prosperity. Thank you.
The UN is a leading actor in trying to heal fractured societies. Cambodia comes to mind. Today's Nepal peace process was facilitated by the UN Guatemala in the 90s. What are the lessons the UN has learned over the past 50 years? Because if any place where there was going to be reconciliation and real discussion, it would seem to me that this is what the UN is for.
Yes, but you see, I mean, when you come to reconcile, for reconciliation, I think people must be honest. They must want to reconcile. They must be truthful. And they must be rational. I mean, you just cannot go into, for instance, the rebels and things that we have, they want to reconcile each other, but they are easily influenced. Right. And then the communicator of this, you know, they have to be truthful. There must be someone you can look upon, trust and all. And then again, maybe the personality of a person, the appearance, all this go into.
So it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, yeah.
Well, that's why I like the UN, because they're doing all the work.
Yes, I think so.
A question for all of you before I get to y'all, you made the Cylons the believers of the one true God, which I really thought was interesting. And everybody else believed in multi-gods. Just idea, the Cheerios I get. Where did that all come from? Why did you do it that way?
I don't know that there's a good answer to that because it sort of sprang from a moment literally on the page. I was writing a speech in the miniseries for number 6, was talking to Gaius Baltar, and we knew that she was a Cylon at that point. And in their discussion, I was writing, and I literally just had her say, "God is love." And I was struck by this notion of a robot professing a belief in God. And I liked it and kept it in the script. And later, one of the network executives named Michael Jackson, no relation, commented that he really liked that and said, you know, why don't you go further in that direction? It's a fascinating idea. And I just grabbed onto it. And I was really interested in that idea that the Cylons, the antagonists in the show, would believe in one true God, a God of love, and that the humans, the ostensible heroes in the show, would believe in many gods. And I thought, well, that's a classic tale of the clash of civilizations. It has parallels in Western history and you know, ancient history. And I thought, oh, that's just a great place to put the audience and make them on the other side of that divide, where they're just traditionally looking at pagans and people who believed in many gods as the people that had to be sort of conquered or wiped out, or that their religions were false. And it was a way of just sort of, you know, putting the audience again in an uncomfortable spot and making them trying to sort of sort out how they felt about that.
Well, to say nothing of the fact that we had, you know, the network saying more religious tension. I'm going, okay.
You don't hear it very often.
No, you're not.
How often do you hear that? Okay.
Only on my show. So this is a question for all of you, and the series is winding down this week, and I'm happy. I'm sorry. What do you want people to take from it?
Oh, I don't know.
Wow.
That's a hard one. I want
know.
people to just, I want them to be entertained, and I want them to think. We asked a lot. We challenged the audience in a lot of ways. We pushed a lot of tough ideas at the audience. We made them look at a lot of ugly things over the course of these 4 years. We had them, you know, question their heroes. We had them root for their villains. We had them try to grapple with really complex moral and ethical dilemmas in the guise of a weekly television series about killer robots in space. And we really asked a lot of people who watched the show, could they keep watching it? Would they keep being entertained? And would they think? And I guess if you watch this series and you decide to think about some of the things that Battlestar Galactica talked about, even if what you end up believing in the end is the exact same thing that you thought at the beginning, at least you thought about it. At least you considered it. At least you had to give it more than just a passing thought through your head. And I guess that's what I want people to take away from the show, is just to think about the world they live in and the human beings that sit next to them.
And we were both really big fans of the genre, you know? I mean, both of us grew up loving the genre, and I think Bonnie said to me very early on, even as they were entertaining this sort of relaunch or reimagining of Battlestar Galactica, before you come in with the pitch, you've got to be able to address the question, why does the world need another space opera? Because at the time, there were plenty of them. And they all kind of felt the same, and they all sort of felt like they were of a piece. And I think when we both got together, we decided that in order to answer that question and to make it worth our while, whether it succeeded or failed, we had to, if nothing else, be able to address that. Well, what is it about the genre that it isn't achieving anymore? What is it about science fiction that used to be about provoking people and presenting our times through the prism of the genre that had since sort of degenerated into sort of this pristine, homogenized, kind of whitewashed proscenium vision? And if we could do that, if we could just answer that question and maybe bring the genre back to a place where it really was talking about the events of our times and really was providing an allegory for the most difficult and sensitive subjects of our culture, then we'd succeed. And whether, 5 people showed up or 5 million showed up, kind of didn't matter. It was really about whether we could address that fundamental question: why does the world need another one of these? And it's not for us to say whether we succeeded in that or not, but that was the goal. I mean, that really was what we set out to do.
How about you guys, as the actors?
The show in itself is, for me, an incredible journey that at the end of which you have been taken on a tremendous ride. And in that ride, you've learned and you've given to it 84 hours of your life. Now, that's an extraordinary commitment for those of you that have done it. And hopefully that you'll come away on your deathbed and look at back on your life and not think that you wasted your time. Because there will be moments when you will think back at films and things that you did with your time and you'll question it. Now, I want to personally thank Famata for taking the time without really you had no idea what you were getting into. And so therefore, to give us that time, and I know that you're very busy, the last thing they have to do here is talk about, a television show. And yet, the most important thing I've ever done with the art form is this program. It's allowed you and everyone in this room to think about the problems and to think about them. And Ron, you hit it. You hit a grand slam. You talk about dialogue. What made this show incredible was the fact that the writers wrote an incredible story guided by Ron Moore and David Icke. They created this. They created something that they gave to us, the production, the set designer, the production designer, the costume designer, the camera department, the actors, the director, took it to a level that surprised the writer. It augmented the material. And then we gave it all of these elements to the editing and post-production. And post-production took it to an extraordinary higher level and gave us thoughts that we had no idea that we could do because we had not seen the images that we had created. We had not tried to put them together. We had not tried to tell the story in respects of editing every single second. Then we put it on the air, and the advent of technology at the highest level of understanding took hold. The entire planet started to blog these guys. And they started to talk with them. And all the writers started to write and listen to the bloggings and started to comment on the bloggings. And the bloggers were going, they took it to a level that was immensely further than we had ever intended. They took us to a place where we had no idea that we had opened that box. Dialogue, reconciliation occurred at that precise moment. We had to give up our ownership and take into consideration and reconcile our ego and our sense of, we're the ones who created this, and allowed them to give us. Then they went back, the writers went back to the drawing board for the second season and took all of what they'd learned through that first season and threw it in there with the augmentation of what happened with the blogging. And then the process started again, and it got worse. People started to understand what they were doing. And so therefore, pretty soon, it was a direct line between all of us talking about all of us in a medium that had never undergone this type of advancement in the history of this medium ever. Television had never been done like this. I don't know I don't know if Ron and David have it in them to do another one. Because you're lucky if you get one. You're lucky if you get one. And for Sci-Fi, for them and Bonnie, and for David, and for all of the incredible production executives that we had that allowed us to do this and make it as dark as we did. May they understand what they've done, and I think they have. I think it started when we got the Peabody. And now, with this, blowing them away. This has destroyed all their thoughts and have made them understand what they've done.
So it was a good experience.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life.
I'm sorry, I had to, you know, I'm sorry.
Lighten it up a little.
That's why I wanted him to go first. I very simply hope, I think what the show, when you scrape everything away, what you're finally left with are two things. One is the idea of patience being the essential element to evolution, and two, the idea of forgiveness being the necessary action in order to break the cycle of violence and begin to create the dialogue. And I do think that the show, over and over and over again, brought those two ideas to light. And I think that that's where we all feel honored. We feel honored to have participated in such profound simplicity towards disciplines which are really difficult to practice, but clearly where we need to go. So that's what I hope you can take a look at in viewing Battlestar Galactica. And I personally would like to thank the UN for this, because this is an extraordinary opportunity for artists to be able to connect themselves to the world, because it's the whole point of what we do. It's what drives our passion. And I would also like to thank Madame Goldberg for bringing her incredible commitment to the show, her intelligence and her grace to this situation. Thank you.
So, I'm just gonna, so here's my two cents. Here's what BSG has done for me. One of the things is you never know who you're talking to, so a modicum of respect to all you meet. That's what I learned. Because you don't know who the Cylons are, you don't know who the humans are. So, you know, try to be respectful of whoever the person is that you meet, and it might work out for you. And I thank God for the word frack. I must say that this is a word I have dropped once or twice on The View. Nobody knew what I'd said. So I find that encouraging.
Yeah.
I may frack myself all the way after this. Thank you to the UN Department of Public Information and the SCI, the Sci Fi Channel. Oh my God. These are the dialogues that we'll be having every day and should be having every day. And I guess it's really through understanding and conversation that we can actually achieve the common goal, which is really just to be the best people we can be at all times. Sometimes, you know, you're flawed. You're not perfect. And that's what we saw. We saw people who were good people making really ugly choices. This happens every day. Happens to diplomats, it happens to actors, it happens to photographers, it happens to everybody. So we must just sort of be vigilant when we see that we've stepped in it. Step back, step out of it, and then move forward again. Thank you for coming tonight. Oh, yes. Oh, wait. Sorry. I'm terribly sorry. There are nice treats in another room through that door. If you'd like to join us, we'll all be in there.